Clarissa Street was like its own little city. If you see movies of Harlem and the Cotton Club and this and that, that was the remnants of Clarissa Street.
It was slick. It was the best neighborhood, especially if you're Black, best neighborhood in all of Rochester, because it was a cultural center.
9 to 5, Monday through Friday, you working. Saturday, it's time to go. Friday night, it's time to go out. That's where you went, Clarissa Street.
Mm-hmm.
Let your hair down, enjoy, forget about what isn't right in the world for a couple of days on the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
That would fortify you to go back on Monday and deal with the reality of what was going on.
Third Ward was a very interesting neighborhood. It was kind of the haven for what I would call the upward mobility African Americans in the community.
Yeah, the Clarissa Street area was far and away the greatest, most thriving area for the Black community. There were two Black communities in Rochester on the east and west side. Clarissa Street was the west side, Aiden Street was the east side. Aiden Street was where they built a lot of projects and stuff. There was no business, but Rochester had Black and white businesses.
All up Clarissa Street and down Clarissa Street in what's called the Cornell District today were Black businesses.
What businesses were there? And did you have everything you needed?
Yeah, well, ironically, my parents owned the grocery store. And the grocery store was on the corner of Ford and Troop. And during that time, there were a lot of Black businesses. Right across from my parents' grocery store was a pool room and a restaurant. But that was on the corner of Ford and Troop. But then if you go down to Clarissa Street, there were a lot of businesses down in that area that were owned by both Black and white.
The neighborhood was a great neighborhood. We had, the pool hall was like around the corner, right on the corner. We had the grocery stores, on every corner there was a grocery store.
We had restaurants, we had cleaners, we had stores, bars. We had the Elks Club, which was celebrating their 100th anniversary. We had rooming houses, because if you young people wouldn't know this, you had rooming houses because Blacks couldn't stay at the hotels downtown. And so you had rooming houses here. So you really didn't have to go downtown to shop for anything. Everything you needed was in the neighborhood.
It was special. We had everything we needed in the neighborhood. We didn't have to go anywhere. We had barbershops and liquor stores and grocery stores and cleaners and record shops and, did I say restaurants? Everything.
Well, you got to remember, back in the early days, shall I say, you lived in a community. In the community here in Clarissa Street and Caledonia Avenue, you could get anything on Caledonia Avenue or just off the street. You had everything. You had your stores, you had your funeral parlor, you had your dentistry, you had your doctors. Everything was on Caledonia Avenue or Clarissa Street.
Everything you can think of was on Clarissa Street. We never had to leave the neighborhood for anything. Nothing. Doctor, clothing, dentist, grocery stores. Every other block had a grocery store. Ice cream parlor, music store. There was a hotel on Clarissa Street called the Gibson Hotel. And so when we started Clarissa Street Reunion, one of the things we wanted to bring back so the young people would know that it was a neighborhood not only full of good people, but good food, restaurants, you name it.
When I lived through the evolution of Clarissa Street, when I first lived on Clarissa Street and during World War II, I think it's safe to say, at that point, all businesses were white-owned. By the time I was a teenager coming out of high school, just about all businesses were Black-owned.
Everything was there in the neighborhood, everything you would have needed. So stores and barber shops, and it was a complete community.
It was a vibrant neighborhood with lots of activities. You know, they had a jazz club, which at one time went very well. It was called At the Pithod. And you had Dan's Tavern, later morphed into Shep's Paradise.
I was managed Shep's. I was Shep's first manager. And before it became Shep's, the place was called Dan's Tavern.
All the upper class black folk back then, they was going to Mr. Daniel's place, which was Dan's Tavern, and I bought it down. It was Shep's. That spot was noted all over, and I had people. And when I went into entertainment, and Kodak, and Xerox, and whoever would send people to Shep's, and if they couldn't come or get away out of the suburbia, out of the motels and things, I had a van that had Shep's Paradise printed on it, and I would go get them, bring them in, take them back home.
It was a good atmosphere. I mean, it was what we call a beloved community. All people got along together.
Everybody knew everybody. It was really amazing. We're talking about a couple thousand people, but people knew each other.
I think just knowing that I could look down the street this way on both sides of the street and tell you who lived there, and the same this way, tell you who lived there and knew them and would speak to them. And of course, we had very good manners. So, you know.
My next door neighbors were the Fuscos from Italy. And then across the street were the Calamettis from Sicily. And then there were the Kadars from Hungary. And then the Podolyaks on one side of the road from Poland. And then we had the Rabakovs from Russia. So I went to school with children whose parents came from all over the world, especially Europe.
You ever hear it takes a village to raise a family?
Yeah.
So we would walk from here, this was called Barclay Street, down to Gregg Street, up Bronson Avenue, all the way up to Genesee Street. Mm. But if you did something wrong from school to here, your parents or your grandparents knew. Everybody knew everybody.
When we lived on Adams Street, because that's where we first grew up, on Adams Street, everything, like I said before, it was a family. So if you did something wrong, guess what? By the time you got home, your neighbor already told your dad. You didn't want dad to know, okay? But anyways, but I don't know if that's still around, that kind of environment. Are the people close enough to say, you're like my child. I want to protect all children. Mm-hmm. So it's not that we're big tattletales, but we want you guys to be safe.
So you didn't have to worry about being safe in the neighborhood. Because again, everybody's parent raised you, assisted in raising you.
You just had fun playing it. You felt safe for any place you went. Because what the parents did, they had like a network. So-and-so over there? Yep, he's at our house.
So everybody knew everybody. If my mom asked me to go to the store, I go to the store with no money, and I'd say, put it on the book. My dad would go out once a week and pay off the book, but we didn't need money. They knew whose child I was, so they knew what book to put it on.
Everybody was family, okay? But there were some neighbors on our street, maybe about 3 houses down, and they had peach trees and apple trees and pear trees. You could never find a peach today like the peaches that were grown in your own backyard. The peaches were huge, and they were juicy, and they were flavorful. So I remember that a lot.
That place right there looks like a driveway. Mm-hmm. That was an alley. That lady had big peaches. We would climb on the roof and take the peaches. We had other older people that would bake them. You go over the bridge, you go to University of Rochester, you had wild raspberries. Mm-hmm. We would pick those. There was just a lot of things. A lot of the older people, the grandparents of our friends, would do a lot of cooking, baking. They showed us, canning.
This was the atmosphere for Clarissa Street. The church was open. I met people there, and I forget, some of the doctors were in membership there. And there weren't, maybe 3 or 4 African American doctors when I came who did house calls. I mean, it was community.
Actually, the influx of blacks at that time was, this was their Mecca, Clarissa Street.
And I'm very proud of Clarissa, even to this day, because there are a lot of activities that went on Clarissa. We were very popular.
There was just a lot of really neat clubs historically on Clarissa Street. All of your business people, they would all come to Clarissa Street. So Clarissa Street was a very popular place.
We had a college right there. Rochester Institute of Technology was there.
And of course, with RIT, you got all these here really fly college students hanging out, doing their thing, walking around all the time, riding their bicycles and, and hanging out. So you had this mixture of people, that was going on. And I think that's the thing that was kind of cool. A lot of my professors lived on Spring Street, or they lived on Washington, or in that general vicinity around RIT, Clarissa Street. So you had a really hip community going on in that area constantly.
It was a center of kind of social activities because you had an Elks club, you had a restaurant, a tavern at Clarissa and Tremont called LaRue's Cavern.
LaRue's Tavern was on the right-hand side here. And I'd go up in the attic and I would watch the people come to LaRue's to dance to music. And sometimes they would spill out on the street and I would see them on the street dancing. And I would get so excited just seeing them. And it was a wonderful memory from that time. Like I said, we didn't have to go anywhere. We had everything we needed right here.
I also remember a lot of the parties, street dances that we had together, And especially when it came to Easter, well, back then, it was Easter strut. Everybody put on their so-called bonnet, and we strutted down Clarissa Street.
Like Sundays, all the ladies with the big hats, church from Mount Olivet right down the street here, they'd go to that church. After church, they'd walk up to Shep's, and I had 2 tables out front, like this couch as long as, I should say. And they would come from church, take off those big, pretty Sunday hats, put them on that table. 2 o'clock in the morning, I was taking some of them home. But there was never any fuss, no muss, nothing. It was always peaceful. So they'd come to Shep's, put the big, pretty hats there. Easter time, the hats got piled up because it was Easter hats.
Next door to Dan's or Shep's was the Elks. Next door to Elks was the Pithod. You all familiar with the Pithod?
Mm-hmm.
That was jazz mecca.
There was something called the Pithod. That's where all the jazz music came. My dad used to be on the door of the Pithod. But any musician that hit town, that's where they were at.
Pithod, Knights of Pythias, is some kind of ancient organization of men getting together to drink a beer, I guess. And the Oddfellows was another kind of fraternal order. So African Americans who were settling in that area, that West Side area, over time, using their interests in history and in community, they called it Pith-Odd, Knights of Pythias and Oddfellows. And it was both a bar and grill, and they had every Friday and Saturday they'd have a swinging band in there.
So when we grew up, all I used to hear about is mom and dad going out on the weekend, go to the Elks, the Pithod, Shep's on Clarissa Street, listen to the great jazz, the great sounds, having a great time. You know, Saturday was the day to go down on Clarissa Street and get your barbecue, listen to the sounds. Rochester was alive then.
The college kids lived in the neighborhood of Troop Street and Spring Street and all that, because that's where RIT used to be. And so they would hang out at the Pith Eye on the corner of Troop and Clarissa. And there were still some Caucasian families living throughout the Third Ward. But basically it was the Harlem of Rochester, New York.
Well, Clarissa Street was thriving with excitement and whatever else. And of course, one of the things that made that was the Pith Eye Hall, one of the great jazz places in the country. People like Ron Carter went to Eastman School of Music. First to play cello and bass came from there. Pee Wee Ellis came from there. Sarah Vaughan spent a lot of time after she got married to one of the young guys who was a trumpet player. I can't think of his name now. Gapman Joan and his family were amongst the music giants there. It was just a place where everybody hung out on the weekends. There was no fighting or anything. It was just love, peace, and jazz.
But I saw people like Art Blakely and Max Roach, John Coltrane, Sonny Rollins, Wayne Shorter, you know, and I remember also George Benson.
And man, when the musicians would come to town, they wouldn't go to downtown to get eat. They come over to this little restaurant, sit on the corner. And oftentimes, here come Miles Davis. Oh yeah, he would be playing out in the suburbs somewhere, but he'd come home to get him some good food. You understand what I mean?
The Elks Club was right next door, and on the corner for a while was a place of entertainment called Pith Eye Room. And that was brought entertainers in from around the city, out of town, or whoever. They performed at the Pith Eye Room. And afterwards, they all come to Sheps. We have a quiet and peaceful. I had a kitchen, my mother ran the kitchen. They could come and eat. But then, you know, they wanted soul food, there it was at Sheps.
I had a first-hand view of the Pith Eye because as a kid growing up, where I lived on Favorite Street, it ran into Troop Street. So I was only a block away from the Pith Eye. So I heard the music from the Pith Eye as a kid growing up. And so when I was able to actually go in the Pith Eye, because I was always stand on the corner, hear the music, see all the adults get dressed up and go out and have a good time at the Pith Eye. And then when I was able myself to enter the Pith Eye for the first time, it just felt like, one of the biggest accomplishments that, that I felt grown up. And then I got, I knew the owner of the Pith Eye and, as a kid growing up, and then, to grow up and then be able to go in there and actually sit down with the people and have a few drinks and talk and laugh and listen to the band, that was one of the greatest things I can remember.
Pith Eye became like a hub. And even Clarissa Street itself was, if you wanted, the really chic, cool, hip community, you would start, I would say, at the Pith Eye.
Oftentimes, big name musicians would come from out of town. And sometimes they couldn't get in the hotel because they were black, you know what I mean? But that whole street was just alive with people who were holding out there, helping and opening and being a neighborhood.
When you hear people talking about jazz clubs were sanctuary, okay? If you listen to the word sanctuary, that means a place of refuge and safety. So if you're coming from an atmosphere where you needed refuge, that let you know what was around where you were living. But when you went to that jazz club, you could escape the griminess or the wrongness of society for 3 or 4 hours and just listen to the tunes, have some good dancing, some good drinking. But then after you left the club, it went back to reality. You better check yourself and watch yourself because that's the way life was.
You hear about it, but during the time I guess I really didn't appreciate the Fifth Eye as well as I do today. But as you look back, you learn how special it was.
It just felt so secure and complete and happy on Clarissa Street, even though, you gotta remember, even though during that time it was the Jim Crow era. There was a lot going on in this country between Black and white Americans. And at the same time, these people were able to still say, hey, I had a good day. I can lay my head down. I ate dinner today. And, you know, we played down the street, or we went to a dance at Hubba Hall. But I like to go through timelines with people. I like to know what year they were born in and what they experienced and what was going on in the country. Were we at war? Was there civil unrest? So there's a lot to imagine.